By default, only the JSON input and output formatters are registered and used. Let's have a look at that GET request for an author we have from a previous demo. We never passed through an accept header value, yet we get back JSON when we send it. That's because our API defaults to that. If we add an accept header with value application JSON, we should still get back JSON. And that is indeed the case. Now let's request XML by changing the accept header to application/XML. Let's send it, and we still get back JSON. That's not okay. We actually have two things we want to fix here. First, if the requested media type is not supported by the API, like application JSON currently isn't, we shouldn't default to the default type, as the consumer probably won't be able to parse it anyway. And then the second thing we want to fix is that we want to ensure that we do support XML. Let's start by handling unsupported media types. We're looking at the configure services method from the startup helper extensions class. We've got this builder.services.addController statement here, which adds framework services used when building APIs to the container so they can be used for dependency injection. Here we can also configure these services. This addControllers method accepts an action to configure it. So let's do that. If we look at what we can configure, we see that there is a return HTTP not acceptable Boolean property we can set. If this Boolean is false, the API will return responses in the default supported format if an unsupported media type is requested. And by default, it is false, which explains why we get back JSON, even though we asked for XML. So we're going to change this to true. And let's give this a try. Let's start by sending the request without an accept header. We get back JSON. So far, so good. Now let's send it with an application JSON accept header. And we still get back JSON. Great. And now let's ask for application XML through the accept header. Previously, we got back JSON when sending this request. This time, we get back a 406 not acceptable. As we should. That's the effect of setting return HTTP not acceptable to true. So far, so good. On to the next part. Supporting an additional formatter, because we do want to support XML. We're back in our configure services method. On the configure parameter, we can find a list of output formatters. We can add new formatters, like one that supports XML, to this list. By the way, if you're wondering how ASP.NET Core chooses its default formatter if no accept header is added to the request, well, it's simply the first one in this list. So by manipulating this list, for example by adding a formatter at the end, inserting one in the beginning, or removing a formatter altogether, we can define what types of output format our API supports and what the default output format is. We want to support XML output, not as a default, but as a possibility. So we can add an XML formatter to this list. We could do this manually by adding a new instance of an XML data contract serializer output formatter to the list. However, that's just one way of adding these serializers. An easier way of adding both input and output formatters for XML is by calling into add XML data contract serializer formatters. So let's do that instead. Alright, let's give this another try. Let's send that request with an accept header of application XML again. And there we go. This time we get back the result from our API in XML format. Let's talk about one more essential concept. The difference between the outer-facing model and the entity model and why that is so important.